Catherine, you should head home for today, the professor said with concern in her voice. Catherine carefully set down her pipette and placed a hand on her swollen belly. Thank you, but this experiment will be done in 30 minutes. That's exactly why you shouldn't push yourself. Your health and the baby's come first. Catherine smiled apologetically. As a researcher at a pharmaceutical company, she had always been dedicated to her work. Even now, 8 months pregnant, that hadn't changed. Her husband Michael understood her dedication but worried about her kindly. Don't overdo it, he would say while making her fresh smoothies every morning without fail. As a project manager at an IT company, his job required frequent business trips, so he tried to support his wife through thoughtful gestures. As Catherine was finishing her experiment and preparing to leave, her smartphone vibrated. It was a message from her mother, Patricia. Important announcement tonight. Lou Jardin at 7. Don't be late. It was typical of her mother, a one-sided directive with no explanation. Her mother, who ran a high-end boutique, was always conscious of maintaining appearances in high society. Lately, she had even developed a habit of checking her Instagram follower count daily. Her sister Ashley was like an intensified version of their mother's values. As a beauty influencer with 500,000 followers, she posted glamorous content daily. When she learned of her sister's pregnancy, she had said, "Don't steal my spotlight," half jokingly, not even trying to hide the true feelings behind those words. Catherine. As she was leaving the lab, she heard a warm voice. It was a call from her grandmother Eleanor. I heard about tonight. It's Ashley's engagement announcement. The groom-to-be is James Anderson from that tech company. Patricia is absolutely thrilled. Her grandmother, a real estate tycoon's widow, had always been the family's moral compass, making sound judgments. Catherine didn't miss the hint of worry in her grandmother's voice. I understand. After hanging up, Catherine let out a deep sigh. Her sister's engagement. It was certainly something to celebrate. Returning to her home in the upscale Chestnut Hill neighborhood, Catherine carefully selected a dress. Not too flashy, but not too plain either. As she stood before the mirror considering the balance, she smiled gently while looking at her growing belly. We'll meet soon. At that moment, her smartphone vibrated again. It was her sister's Instagram story. Tonight will be the most amazing moment of my life. The post already had thousands of likes. She could easily imagine her sister proudly showing those numbers to their mother. Shall we go? Whispering to her reflection in the mirror, Catherine took her coat from the closet. The cold early winter wind gently rattled the windows. Under Mistral's elegant chandeliers, her mother was beaming. Dressed in a Chanel tweed suit, she greeted arriving guests with the air of a society queen. The upscale French restaurant, not yet open to the public, was already filled with an exclusive atmosphere. Dom Perignon in crystal glasses scattered soft light throughout the room. Isn't my sister here yet? Ashley asked their mother somewhat irritably. Dressed in a pure white Alexander McQueen gown, she had already taken several selfies. Her fiancé James watched her contentedly while sipping his champagne. I told her to rest at home, considering her condition. At those words, her grandmother quietly furrowed her brow. Her vintage Cartier necklace swayed slightly with the movement. With 2 weeks until her due date? Is she really too ill to attend a party? Well, this is Ashley's special day. If something were to happen with Catherine, it would ruin everything. Besides, her dress situation would spoil the photos. Ashley nodded with satisfaction at their mother's words. The Instagram live stream was already set up. Meanwhile, at her home in Chestnut Hill, Catherine was quietly trying to steady her breathing. In the dimly lit evening room, she sank into the sofa, facing the growing discomfort. Outside the window, the trees lining the upscale residential street swayed in the cold wind. She was completely alone in the large house. Even Martha, the housekeeper, was helping at the engagement party on her mother's orders. No one was left to reach for the warm herbal tea sitting in the sink. Around 7 p.m., the first intense pain struck. Cold sweat ran down her back. She sent a brief message to Michael, who was in an important meeting on the West Coast. "I think labor has started. Don't worry, I'm heading to the hospital." A hurried reply came. "Coming home right now. Booking the next flight. Catherine, I love you." Before she could finish reading the reply, another contraction hit. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her usual composure was slowly crumbling. Her hands, perfectly steady in the lab, now wouldn't stop shaking. With trembling fingers, she dialed her mother's number. The ringtone seemed unusually long. Her heart raced with each contraction. "Catherine? I'm very busy right now." Beyond her mother's voice, she could hear the pop of champagne corks. Someone's laughter. Clinking glasses. Jazz music playing in the background. "Mom, contractions, come quickly." She struggled to form words between breaths. Pain distorted her vision. She could hear the tremor in her voice. "We're having a family dinner at an upscale restaurant right now. At a time like this. Today is your sister's engagement celebration." Her mother's exasperated response pierced her heart. The voice completely lacked its usual social warmth. Right after, she heard her sister's voice in the background. "Mom, let's make a toast. My sister can wait." Someone on the other end called out, "The live stream is starting." Lively music began to play. Laughter overlapped. The sound of champagne. Toasting cheers. Catherine quietly gripped her smartphone. Her fingers looked strangely white on the screen. The joints were pronounced. "I understand. I'm sorry for interrupting." Her voice came out more composed than she expected. "That's right, I'll call a nurse later. You still have 2 weeks, so it's probably just false labor. More importantly, my Instagram followers are skyrocketing." Her mother's voice faded away. In the background, what sounded like James Anderson's father was beginning to give a toast. When the call ended, the room's silence rang in her ears like tinnitus. Outside the window, a cold early winter rain had begun to fall. Raindrops traced down the dark window pane. Another contraction hit. This time, the most intense pain yet. It felt like her insides were being torn apart. Cold sweat ran down her back. She checked the clock. The intervals were already 3 minutes apart. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the taxi booking app. The screen showed, "Searching for drivers." Just then, the phone rang. A familiar number. Her grandmother's steady voice resonated through the dark room. That voice held a warmth her mother could never possess. Fighting back tears, though her voice was already shaking. "It's all right. I've already sent a car. It'll be there in 10 minutes, so wait by the entrance. Did you put on your coat?" A sigh of relief escaped her. Her grandmother's voice had a mysterious power. It was the same warmth she'd known for over 30 years. "But Michael. He's taking the next flight from San Francisco. Now, take a deep breath. Let's go to the hospital together. Stay calm for the baby's sake." Catherine quietly stood up. She checked the hospital bag she had prepared in her handbag. Then, she took out a small envelope and placed it on the living room table. Her mother's name was carefully written on the pure white envelope. On her way to the entrance, her smartphone vibrated. It was an Instagram notification. Catherine turned off the notifications. Outside, a black Mercedes was already waiting at the entrance. The driver got out and opened a large umbrella. The rain was growing heavier. "Quickly, to Brigham and Women's." Her grandmother's voice mixed with the sound of rain. There was quiet anger in that voice. Another contraction hit in the car. Her grandmother silently held her hand. That hand conveyed more love than words ever could. Street lights flickered dimly through the rain-spotted windows. As they passed Boston Common, Catherine closed her eyes. Her mother's sigh and sister's laughter still echoed in her ears. The maternity ward at Brigham and Women's Hospital was wrapped in midnight silence. Under the soft lighting of the delivery room, Catherine battled intense contractions. Her grandmother continued to hold her hand throughout. "Just a little more, Catherine," Dr. Sarah Miller announced calmly. The hem of her white coat swayed with her busy footsteps. The sound of nurses efficiently preparing equipment echoed through the room. "The baby's doing well. Heart rate is stable." The regular beeping of the monitor confirmed this. A brief respite between contractions. Catherine took a deep breath. "Michael? He just boarded the flight from San Francisco." Her grandmother answered while checking her phone screen. Her voice carried unprecedented gentleness. Just then, an Instagram notification scrolled across the screen. Posted by her sister Ashley. The photo showed their mother toasting with champagne. The likes had surpassed 10,000. "Let's turn this off." Her grandmother quietly took the smartphone and pressed the power button. Just as the screen went dark, another contraction hit. A wave of pain swept through her entire body. Cold sweat beaded on her forehead. "Take deep breaths. That's it, just like that." Dr. Sarah's voice seemed distant. The clock hands pointed to midnight. At that time, the party at Mistral was reaching its peak. Her mother was absorbed in Instagram live streaming. Her posts as a high-end boutique owner always attracted attention. "Hey, Mom, how's this photo?" Ashley showed a photo of herself with James Anderson. Perfect smile, perfect composition. Like a magazine cover. "Beautiful. Let's post it right away." No one mentioned the hospital. In the delivery room, the battle for a new life's arrival continued. Catherine summoned her remaining strength. At that moment, a small cry rang out. It's a girl. Outside the window, the rain had stopped, and the full moon peeked through. Catherine, you did wonderfully. Tears glistened in her grandmother's eyes. A nurse gently wiped the baby and placed her on Catherine's chest. The warmth of the tiny life spread throughout her body. Hello? In a faint voice, Catherine spoke to her child for the first time. The baby moved her tiny hand as if responding to the voice. Just then, the delivery room door burst open. Catherine. Michael rushed in, out of breath. At the sight of her husband who had finally made it, tears welled up in Catherine's eyes. Michael knelt beside his wife, taking her hand. Then, he gently touched their newborn daughter's tiny cheek. She's so beautiful. The three were enveloped in deep emotion. Everyone wished to engrave this moment in their hearts forever. Mrs. Miller, there's a call from your mother. A nurse announced hesitantly. Catherine shook her head slightly. Later. Her grandmother nodded deeply at those words. Right now, they just wanted to soak in this miraculous moment. By sunrise, there were over 20 unread messages from her mother. Most of them were reports about Instagram-like counts. Moved to a hospital room, Catherine took out a small envelope. In the soft dawn light, she picked up a pen. It was finally time to write the letter. Dear Mother. The moment she began writing, 30 years of emotions poured out. The days spent constantly in her sister's shadow since childhood. Memories of unrecognized efforts. And tonight's events. After 30 years of doting on my sister while neglecting me, tonight's events have finally set me free. The pen glided smoothly across the paper. I won't teach my baby about your kind of twisted love. Outside the window, Boston was about to greet a new morning. Sunlight began to filter through the trees lining Newbury Street. Goodbye, Catherine. She placed the letter in the envelope and set it on the table. At that moment, the baby made a small sound. Catherine gently lifted her daughter. The beginning of a new life. Her grandmother smiled quietly. Michael placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. Just then, the mobile phone rang again. Her mother's name on the screen. However, no one reached for the phone. On the third day, Patricia Wallace was ordering the most luxurious bouquet from a high-end flower shop. An extravagant combination of roses and Casablanca lilies, adorned with premium ribbon. The price easily exceeded $500. The delivery address is Brigham and Women's Hospital, maternity ward. At that moment, her smartphone vibrated. It was a call from her boutique on Newbury Street. Mrs. Wallace, it's terrible. We've been getting cancellations since this morning. The manager's voice trembled with anxiety. Photos from the party had begun to spread. Nonsense. It's just temporary. However, contrary to her words, her hands were shaking slightly. Her reputation in high society was her lifeline. Arriving at the hospital, she received unexpected words at the reception. Regarding room 506, we've been instructed by the patient to decline visitors. I am her mother. I'm sorry. We were specifically told to decline family visitors. Just then, Eleanor Wallace quietly appeared. The envelope her grandmother handed over bore her name in familiar, meticulous handwriting. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the letter. Dear Mother. With each line she read, the color drained from Patricia's face. 30 years of feelings. Undeniable facts. And words of farewell. You reap what you sow, Patricia. Her grandmother's voice was quiet but stern. But be quiet. At her grandmother's words, Patricia was lost for words. Down the hall, a baby's cry echoed. That evening, Ashley's Instagram follower count began to plummet rapidly. Comments on her engagement party posts had turned harsh. The next morning, among the nurses at Massachusetts General Hospital, a story began to spread. The rumor spread rapidly among Boston's medical community. At the same time, regular customers at the Newbury Street boutique began canceling their accounts one after another. I'm sorry, but our future association. The stern gazes of society ladies cornered Patricia. The social status she had built over many years began to crumble audibly. Meanwhile, at the Anderson family home of Ashley's fiancé James, a heavy atmosphere hung in the air. This affects our family's reputation as well. James's mother spoke quietly to her husband. On the table lay the Boston Globe's gossip column. The headline, "Twisted Motherhood in High Society," gleamed coldly. That night, Ashley felt anxiety for the first time as she stared at her engagement ring. Emails from sponsor companies kept arriving. Patricia sat at her desk in her room. Before her lay graphs showing the boutique's plummeting sales. And a mountain of cancelled orders. Everything she had built over 30 years was silently crumbling. Outside the window, quiet rain continued to fall in Chestnut Hill. No one walked the tree-lined streets of the upscale neighborhood. In the hospital room, Catherine held her daughter while gazing out the window. Michael fully supported his wife's decision. This is the path we've chosen. Her grandmother quietly nodded at those words. A few days later, a letter arrived from the Anderson family. After careful consideration, we must dissolve the engagement. Ashley cried for the first time. However, her tears were less about regret and more about the dramatic decrease in likes on her posts. Patricia faced new realities in her study. Notices from the bank. Warnings about the house she had put up as collateral. Everything was crumbling like a castle built on sand. So these are the consequences of my choices. She stared at a photograph on her desk. A family photo from 10 years ago. When everyone was smiling. But now, those smiles seemed somehow artificial. In the upscale neighborhood of Chestnut Hill, new rumors began to spread. I hear the Wallace Boutique is closing. Is it true about the broken engagement? It wasn't a dramatic punishment. However, the everyday collapse of high society life sometimes proves to be the most devastating punishment. In room 506 at Brigham and Women's Hospital, a new family's story was about to begin. The setting sun through the window gently illuminated mother and daughter. We'll walk a different path. Catherine's words were met with Michael's quiet nod. Her grandmother watched out the window while holding her granddaughter's tiny hand. Spring in Boston, 5 years later. In a research room at Harvard Medical School, Catherine studied data on a new cancer drug. Cherry blossom petals danced outside the window. Mommy. Turning around, she saw her 5-year-old daughter Emily running in. It had become their daily routine for her grandmother to pick Emily up from daycare and bring her to her mother's workplace. Emily, no running. Eleanor Wallace's gentle voice followed. Even with age, she maintained her grace. Hey, Mommy, guess what? My teacher praised my drawing today. Emily proudly showed her picture. A garden full of colorful flowers. 3 figures holding hands and smiling, Emily, Catherine, and Michael. It's beautiful. Catherine hugged her daughter while nodding slightly to her lab colleagues. They all returned warm smiles. Meanwhile, in a suburban Boston apartment, Patricia Wallace sat alone by the window. A modest room, nothing like her former mansion. An unopened letter lay on the table. It was from her younger daughter, Ashley. She was now working at a small beauty salon in Los Angeles. Her social media followers had dwindled to just a few hundred. Mom, can't we start over? The letter's tone lacked its former arrogance. Yet somehow, a calculating undertone still seemed to lurk behind the words. Patricia stood and sat at her vanity. Her reflection in the mirror looked strangely unfamiliar. After closing the boutique, she had completely disappeared from society. She was even afraid to walk the streets of Chestnut Hill now. The cold gazes of former acquaintances still stung her heart. At the same time, dinner preparations were beginning at the Miller family's new home. Emily, go wash your hands. At Catherine's voice, her daughter happily ran off. In the kitchen, Michael, home from work, was cooking pasta. His IT project successes had led to a flourishing career. Grandma, taste this sauce. Family dinners were always wrapped in warmth. Wine glasses on the table scattered soft light. By the way, Eleanor began quietly. I received a letter from Patricia this morning. The air froze for a moment. Dear Catherine, could you let me see you once more? The letter was filled with formal apologies. However, words of genuine remorse were nowhere to be found. I won't reply. Catherine's voice was quiet but firm. Mommy, seconds please. Emily's voice lightened the atmosphere. Here you go. Late that night, Catherine watched Emily's sleeping face. Long eyelashes, soft cheeks. Innocent breathing echoed in the room. It really was the right choice. From behind, Michael gently embraced her shoulders. The next morning, on the Charles River walkway, Catherine walked hand in hand with Emily. Spring sunshine poured down gently. Mommy, look at those ducks. Where her daughter pointed, a mother duck swam with her ducklings. Emily? What is it? Mommy will always be on your side. I know. That innocent response warmed Catherine's heart. From the direction of Boston Common, church bells rang out. The sound announcing the start of a new Sunday. Catherine looked up at the sky. Thin clouds drifted across the blue expanse. Like memories of the past. Let's go. Mother and daughter walked on, hand in hand. Anyone could see how happy they looked. Spring light sparkled on the surface of the Charles River.